The pipe running from the lower part of the balloon runs into this cylindrical receptacle through the lower plate. It penetrates the latter, and then takes the form of a helicoidal or screw-shaped spiral, the rings of which, rising one over the other, occupy nearly the whole of the height of the tank. Before again issuing from it, this spiral runs into a small cone with a concave base that is turned downward in the shape of a spherical cap. It is from the top of this cone that the second pipe issues, and it runs, as I have said, into the upper beds of the balloon. The spherical cap of the small cone is of platinum, so as not to melt by the action of the cylinder and blowpipe, for the latter are placed upon the bottom of the iron tank in the midst of the helicoidal spiral, and the extremity of their flame will slightly touch the cap in question. You all know, gentlemen, what a calorifer to heat apartments is. You know how it acts. The air of the apartments is forced to pass through its pipes, and is then released with a heightened temperature. Well, what I have just described to you is nothing more nor less than a calorifer. In fact, what is it that takes place? The cylinder once lighted, the hydrogen in the spiral and in the concave cone becomes heated, and rapidly ascends through the pipe that leads to the upper part of the balloon. A vacuum is created below, and it attracts the gas in the lower parts. This becomes heated in its turn, and is continually replaced. Thus, an extremely rapid current of gas is established in the pipes and in the spiral, which issues from the balloon and then returns to it, and is heated over again, incessantly. Now, the cases increase 1/480 of their volume for each degree of heat applied. If then I force the temperature 18 degrees, the hydrogen of the balloon will dilate 18,480 or 1614 cubic feet, and will therefore displace 1614 more cubic feet of air, which will increase its ascensional power by 160 pounds. This is equivalent to throwing out that weight of ballast. If I augment the temperature by 180 degrees, the gas will dilate 18480 and will displace 16,740 cubic feet more, and its ascensional force will be augmented by 1,600 pounds. Thus you see, gentlemen, that I can easily effect very considerable changes of equilibrium. The volume of the balloon has been calculated in such manner that, when half inflated, it displaces a weight of air exactly equal to that of the envelope containing the hydrogen gas, and of the car occupied by the passengers, and all its apparatus and accessories. At this point of inflation, it is in exact equilibrium with the air, and neither mounts nor descends. In order, then, to effect an ascent, I give the gas a temperature superior to the temperature of the surrounding air by means of my cylinder. By this excess of heat it obtains a larger distension and inflates the balloon more. The latter, then, ascends in proportion as I heat the hydrogen. The descent, of course, is effected by lowering the heat of the cylinder and letting the temperature abate. The ascent would be usually more rapid than the descent, but that is a fortunate circumstance, since it is of no importance to me to descend rapidly, while on the other hand, it is by a very rapid ascent that I avoid obstacles. The real danger lurks below and not above. Besides, as I have said, I have a certain quantity of ballast, which will enable me to ascend more rapidly still, when necessary. My valve at the top of the balloon is nothing more nor less than a safety valve. The balloon always retains the same quantity of hydrogen, and the variations of temperature that I produce in the midst of this shut-up gas are of themselves sufficient to provide for all these ascending and descending movements. Now, gentlemen, as a practical detail, let me add this. The combustion of the hydrogen and of the oxygen at the point of the cylinder produces solely the vapor or steam of water. I have, therefore, provided the lower part of the cylindrical iron box with escape pipe, with a valve operating by means of a pressure of 2 atmospheres. Consequently, so soon as this amount of pressure is attained, the steam escapes of itself. Here are the exact figures: 25 gallons of water, separated into its constituent elements, pounds of oxygen and pounds of hydrogen. This represents at atmospheric tension 1,800 cubic feet of the former and 780 cubic feet of the latter, or 5670 cubic feet, in all of the mixture. Hence, the stopcock of my cylinder, when fully open, expends 27 cubic feet per hour, with a flame at least 6 times as strong as that of the large lamps used for lighting streets. On an average, then, and in order to keep myself at a very moderate elevation, I should not burn more than 9 cubic feet per hour, so that my 25 gallons of water represent 636 hours of aerial navigation, or a little more than 26 days. Well, as I can descend when I please, to replenish my stock of water on the way, my trip might be indefinitely prolonged. Such, gentlemen, is my secret, It is simple, and like most simple things it cannot fail to succeed. The dilation and contraction of the gas in the balloon is my means of locomotion, which calls for neither cumbersome wings, nor any other mechanical motor. A calorifer to produce the changes of temperature, and a cylinder to generate the heat, are neither inconvenient nor heavy. I think, therefore, that I have combined all the elements of success. Dr. Ferguson here terminated his discourse and was most heartily applauded. There was not an objection to make to it, all had been foreseen and decided. However, said the captain, the thing may prove dangerous. What matters that, replied the doctor, provided that it be practicable. Chapter 11th. The arrival at Zanzibar, the English consul, ill will of the inhabitants, the island of Kumbeni, the rain-makers, inflation of the balloon, departure on the 18th of April, the last goodbye, the Victoria. An invariably favourable wind had accelerated the progress of the Resolute toward the place of her destination. The navigation of the Mozambique Channel was especially calm and pleasant. The agreeable character of the trip by sea was regarded as a good omen of the probable issue of the trip through the air. Everyone looked forward to the hour of arrival, and sought to give the last touch to the doctor's preparations. At length the vessel hove in sight of the town of Zanzibar, upon the island of the same name, and on the 15th of April at 11 o'clock in the morning she anchored in the port. The island of Zanzibar belongs to the Imam of Muscat, an ally of France and England, and is undoubtedly his finest settlement. The port is frequented by a great many vessels from the neighbouring countries. The island is separated from the African coast only by a channel, the greatest width of which is but 30 miles. It has a large trade in gums, ivory, and above all in ebony, for Zanzibar is the great slave market. Thither converges all the booty captured in the battles which the chiefs of the interior are continually fighting. This traffic extends along the whole eastern coast, and as far as the Nile latitudes. Mr. G. Legion even reports that he has seen it carried on openly under the French flag. Upon the arrival of the Resolute, the English consul at Zanzibar came on board to offer his services to the doctor, of whose projects the European newspapers had made him aware for a month past. But up to that moment, he had remained with the numerous phalanx of the incredulous. I doubted, said he, holding out his hand to Dr. Ferguson, but now I doubt no longer. He invited the doctor, Kennedy, and the faithful Joe, of course, to his own dwelling. Through his courtesy, the doctor was enabled to have knowledge of the various letters that he had received from Captain Speke. The captain and his companions had suffered dreadfully from hunger and bad weather before reaching the Ugogo country. They could advance only with extreme difficulty, and did not expect to be able to communicate again for a long time. Those are perils and privations which we shall manage to avoid, said the doctor. The baggage of the 3 travellers was conveyed to the consul's residence. Arrangements were made for disembarking the balloon upon the beach at Zanzibar. There was a convenient spot, near the signal mast, close by an immense building, that would serve to shelter it from the east winds. This huge tower, resembling a tun standing on one end, beside which the famous Heidelberg tun would have seemed but a very ordinary barrel, served as a fortification, and on its platform were stationed Baluchis, armed with lances. These Baluchis are a kind of brawling, good-for-nothing Janissaries. But when about to land the balloon, the consul was informed that the population of the island would oppose their doing so by force. Nothing is so blind as fanatical passion. The news of the arrival of a Christian, who was to ascend into the air, was received with rage. The Negroes, more exasperated than the Arabs, saw in this project an attack upon their religion. They took it into their heads that some mischief was meant to the sun and the moon. Now, these 2 luminaries are objects of veneration to the African tribes, and they determined to oppose so sacrilegious an enterprise. The consul, informed of their intentions, conferred with Dr. Ferguson and Captain Bennet on the subject. The latter was unwilling to yield to threats, but his friend dissuaded him from any idea of violent retaliation. We shall certainly come out winners, he said. Even the Imam's soldiers will lend us a hand if we need it. But, my dear captain, an accident may happen in a moment, and it would require but one unlucky blow to do the balloon an irreparable injury, so that the trip would be totally defeated. Therefore we must act with the greatest caution. But what are we to do? If we land on the coast of Africa we shall encounter the same difficulties. What are we to do? Nothing is more simple, replied the consul. You observe those small islands outside of the port, Land your balloon on one of them, surround it with a guard of sailors, and you will have no risk to run." "Just the thing," said the doctor, "and we shall be entirely at our ease in completing our preparations." The captain yielded to these suggestions, and the Resolute was headed for the island of Koombeni. During the morning of the 16th April, the balloon was placed in safety in the middle of a clearing in the Great Woods, with which the soil is studded. 2 masts 80 feet in height were raised at the same distance from each other. Blocks and tackle, placed at their extremities, afforded the means of elevating the balloon by the aid of a transverse rope. It was then entirely uninflated. The interior balloon was fastened to the exterior one in such manner as to be lifted up in the same way. To the lower end of each balloon were fixed the pipes that served to introduce the hydrogen gas. The whole day, on the 17th, was spent in arranging the apparatus destined to produce the gas. It consisted of some 30 casks, in which the decomposition of water was effected by means of iron filings and sulfuric acid placed together in a large quantity of the first-named fluid. The hydrogen passed into a huge central cask, after having been washed on the way, and thence into each balloon by the conduit pipes. In this manner, each of them received a certain accurately ascertained quantity of gas. For this purpose, there had to be employed 1,866 pounds of sulfuric acid, 16,050 pounds of iron, and 9,166 gallons of water. This operation commenced on the following night, about 3 a.m., and lasted nearly 8 hours. The next day, the balloon, covered with its network, undulated gracefully above its car, which was held to the ground by numerous sacks of earth. The inflating apparatus was put together with extreme care, and the pipes issuing from the balloon were securely fitted to the cylindrical case. The anchors, the cordage, the instruments, the travelling wraps, the awning, the provisions, and the arms were put in the place assigned to them in the car. The supply of water was procured at Zanzibar. The 200 pounds of ballast were distributed in 50 bags placed at the bottom of the car, but within arm's reach. These preparations were concluded about 5 o'clock in the evening, while sentinels kept close watch around the island, and the boats of the Resolute patrolled the channel. The blacks continued to show their displeasure by grimaces and contortions. Their obi-men or wizards went up and down among the angry throngs, pouring fuel on the flame of their fanaticism, and some of the excited wretches, more furious and daring than the rest, attempted to get to the island by swimming, but they were easily driven off. Thereupon the sorceries and incantations commenced. The rain-makers, who pretend to have control over the clouds, invoked the storms and the stone showers, as the blacks call hail to their aid. To compel them to do so, they plucked leaves of all the different trees that grow in that country, and boiled them over a slow fire, while at the same time a sheep was killed by thrusting a long needle into its heart. But in spite of all their ceremonies, the sky remained clear and beautiful, and they profited nothing by their slaughtered sheep and their ugly grimaces. The blacks then abandoned themselves to the most furious orgies, and got fearfully drunk on tembo, a kind of ardent spirits drawn from the cocoa-nut tree, and an extremely heady sort of beer called tagwa. Their chants, which were destitute of all melody but were sung in excellent time, continued until far into the night. About 6 o'clock in the evening, the captain assembled the travellers and the officers of the ship at a farewell repast in his cabin. Kennedy, whom nobody ventured to question now, sat with his eyes riveted on Dr. Ferguson, murmuring indistinguishable words. In other respects the dinner was a gloomy one. The approach of the final moment filled everybody with the most serious reflections. What had fate in store for these daring adventurers? Should they ever again find themselves in the midst of their friends, or seated at the domestic hearth? Were their travelling apparatus to fail, what would become of them among those ferocious savage tribes, in regions that had never been explored, and in the midst of boundless deserts? Such thoughts as these, which had been dim and vague until then, or but slightly regarded when they came up, returned upon their excited fancies with intense force at this parting moment. Dr. Ferguson, still cold and impassible, talked of this, that, and the other, but he strove in vain to overcome this infectious gloominess. He utterly failed. As some demonstration against the personal safety of the doctor and his companions was feared, all three slept that night on board the Resolute. At 6 o'clock in the morning they left their cabin and landed on the island of Koombeni. The balloon was swaying gently to and fro in the morning breeze. The sandbags that had held it down were now replaced by some 20 strong-armed sailors, and Captain Bennett and his officers were present to witness the solemn departure of their friends. At this moment Kennedy went right up to the doctor, grasped his hand and said, "Samuel, have you absolutely determined to go?" "Solemnly determined, my dear Dick. I have done everything that I could to prevent this expedition, have I not?" "Everything." "Well then, my conscience is clear on that score, and I will go with you." "I was sure you would," said the doctor, betraying in his features swift traces of emotion. At last the moment of final leave-taking arrived. The captain and his officers embraced their dauntless friends with great feeling, not excepting even Joe, who, worthy fellow, was as proud and happy as a prince. Every one in the party insisted upon having a final shake of the doctor's hand. At 9 o'clock the three travellers got into their car. The doctor lit the combustible in his cylinder and turned the flame so as to produce a rapid heat, and the balloon, which had rested on the ground in perfect equipoise, began to rise in a few minutes, so that the seamen had to slacken the ropes they held it by. The car then rose about 20 feet above their heads. "My friends," exclaimed the doctor, standing up between his two companions and taking off his hat, "let us give our aerial ship a name that will bring her good luck. Let us christen her Victoria." This speech was answered with stentorian cheers of "Huzzah for the Queen! Huzzah for Old England!" At this moment the ascensional force of the balloon increased prodigiously, and Ferguson, Kennedy, and Joe waved a last goodbye to their friends. "Let go all," shouted the doctor, and at the word the Victoria shot rapidly up into the sky, while the 4 carronades on board the Resolute thundered forth a parting salute in her honour. Chapter 12. Crossing the strait, the Rima, Dick's remark and Joe's proposition, a recipe for coffee making, the Eusaramo, the unfortunate Mason, Mount Duthumi, the doctor's cards, night under a nopal. The air was pure, the wind moderate, and the balloon ascended almost perpendicularly to a height of 1,500 feet, as indicated by a depression of 2 inches in the barometric column. At this height a more decided current carried the balloon toward the southwest. What a magnificent spectacle was then outspread beneath the gaze of the travellers! The island of Zanzibar could be seen in its entire extent, marked out by its deeper colour upon a vast planisphere. The fields had the appearance of patterns of different colours, and thick clumps of green indicated the groves and thickets. The inhabitants of the island looked no larger than insects. The huzzing and shouting were little by little lost in the distance, and only the discharge of the ship's guns could be heard in the concavity beneath the balloon, as the latter sped on its flight. "How fine that is," said Joe, breaking silence for the first time. He got no reply. The doctor was busy observing the variations of the barometer and noting down the details of his ascent. Kennedy looked on, and had not eyes enough to take in all that he saw. The rays of the sun coming to the aid of the heating cylinder, the tension of the gas increased, and the Victoria attained the height of 2,500 feet. The Resolute looked like a mere cockleshell, and the African coast could be distinctly seen in the west, marked out by a fringe of foam. "You don't talk," said Joe again. "We are looking," said the doctor, directing his spyglass toward the mainland. "For my part I must talk." "As much as you please, Joe, talk as much as you like." And Joe went on alone with a tremendous volley of exclamations. The O's and the R's exploded one after the other incessantly from his lips. During his passage over the sea, the doctor deemed it best to keep at his present elevation. He could thus reconnoitre a greater stretch of the coast. The thermometer and the barometer, hanging up inside of the half-opened awning, were always within sight, and a second barometer suspended outside was to serve during the night watches. At the end of about 2 hours the Victoria, driven along at a speed of a little more than 8 miles, very visibly neared the coast of the mainland. The doctor, thereupon, determined to descend a little nearer to the ground. So he moderated the flame of his cylinder, and the balloon in a few moments had descended to an altitude only 300 feet above the soil. It was then found to be passing just over the Rima country, the name of this part of the eastern coast of Africa. Dense borders of mango trees protected its margin, and the ebb tide disclosed to view their thick roots, chafed and gnawed by the teeth of the Indian Ocean. The sands which, at an earlier period, formed the coastline, rounded away along the distant horizon, and Mount Nguru reared aloft its sharp summit in the northwest. The Victoria passed near to a village which the doctor found marked upon his chart as KL. Its entire population had assembled in crowds, and were yelling with anger and fear, at the same time vainly directing their arrows against this monster of the air that swept along so majestically away above all their powerless fury. The wind was setting to the southward, but the doctor felt no concern on that score, since it enabled him the better to follow the route traced by Captains Burton and Speke. Kennedy had at length become as talkative as Joe, and the two kept up a continual interchange of admiring interjections and exclamations. "Out upon stagecoaches," said one. "Steamers indeed," said the other. "Railroads, rubbish," put in Kennedy, "that you travel on without seeing the country." "Balloons, they're the sort for me," Joe would add. "Why, you don't feel yourself going, and nature takes the trouble to spread herself out before one's eyes. What a splendid sight, what a spectacle, what a delight, a dream in a hammock." "Suppose we take our breakfast," was Joe's unpoetical change of tune at last, for the keen, open air had mightily sharpened his appetite. "Good idea, my boy." "Oh, it won't take us long to do the cooking, biscuit and potted meat." "And as much coffee as you like," said the doctor. "I give you leave to borrow a little heat from my cylinder. There's enough and to spare for that matter, and so we shall avoid the risk of a conflagration." "That would be a dreadful misfortune," ejaculated Kennedy. "It's the same as a powder magazine suspended over our heads." "Not precisely," said Ferguson, "but still if the gas were to take fire it would burn up gradually, and we should settle down on the ground, which would be disagreeable. But never fear, our balloon is hermetically sealed." "Let us eat a bite then," replied Kennedy. "Now, gentlemen," put in Joe, "while doing the same as you, I'm going to get you up a cup of coffee that I think you'll have something to say about." "The fact is," added the doctor, "that Joe, along with 1,000 other virtues, has a remarkable talent for the preparation of that delicious beverage. He compounds it of a mixture of various origin, but he never would reveal to me the ingredients." "Well, master, since we are so far above ground, I can tell you the secret. It is just to mix equal quantities of mocha, of Bourbon coffee, and of Rio Nunes." A few moments later, 3 steaming cups of coffee were served, and topped off a substantial breakfast, which was additionally seasoned by the jokes and repartees of the guests. Each one then resumed his post of observation. The country over which they were passing was remarkable for its fertility. Narrow, winding paths plunged in beneath the overarching verdure. They swept along above cultivated fields of tobacco, maize, and barley at full maturity, and here and there immense rice fields, full of straight stalks and purple blossoms. They could distinguish sheep and goats too, confined in large cages, set up on piles to keep them out of reach of the leopard's fangs. Luxuriant vegetation spread in wild profuseness over this prodigal soil. Village after village rang with yells of terror and astonishment at the sight of the Victoria, and Dr. Ferguson prudently kept her above the reach of the barbarian arrows. The savages below, thus baffled, ran together from their huddle of huts, and followed the travellers with their vain imprecations while they remained in sight. At noon, the doctor, upon consulting his map, calculated that they were passing over the Uzeramo country. The soil was thickly studded with cocoa-nut, papaw, and cottonwood trees, above which the balloon seemed to disport itself like a bird. Joe found this splendid vegetation a matter of course, seeing that they were in Africa. Kennedy descried some hares and quails that asked nothing better than to get a good shot from his fowling piece, but it would have been powder wasted, since there was no time to pick up the game. The aeronauts swept on with the speed of 12 miles per hour, and soon were passing in 38 degrees 20 minutes east longitude, over the village of Tounda. "It was there," said the doctor, "that Burton and Speke were seized with violent fevers, and for a moment thought their expedition ruined. And yet they were only a short distance from the coast, but fatigue and privation were beginning to tell upon them severely. In fact, there is a perpetual malaria reigning throughout the country in question. Even the doctor could hope to escape its effects only by rising above the range of the miasma that exhales from this damp region, whence the blazing rays of the sun pump up its poisonous vapors. Once in a while they could descry a caravan resting in a kraal, awaiting the freshness and cool of the evening to resume its route. These kraals are wide patches of cleared land, surrounded by hedges and jungles, where traders take shelter against not only the wild beasts, but also the robber tribes of the country. They could see the natives running and scattering in all directions at the sight of the Victoria. Kennedy was keen to get a closer look at them, but the doctor invariably held out against the idea. "The chiefs are armed with muskets," he said, and our balloon would be too conspicuous a mark for their bullets. Would a bullet hole bring us down? Asked Joe. Not immediately, but such a hole would soon become a large torn orifice through which our gas would escape. Then let us keep at a respectful distance from yon miscreants. What must they think as they see us sailing in the air? I'm sure they must feel like worshipping us. Let them worship away then, replied the doctor, but at a distance. There is no harm done in getting as far away from them as possible. See, the country is already changing its aspect. The villages are fewer and farther between. The mango trees have disappeared, for their growth ceases at this latitude. The soil is becoming hilly and portends mountains not far off. Yes, said Kennedy, it seems to me that I can see some high land on this side. In the west, those are the nearest ranges of the Orizara, Mount Duthumi, no doubt, behind which I hope to find shelter for the night. I'll stir up the heat in the cylinder a little, for we must keep at an elevation of 500 or 600 feet. That was a grand idea of yours, sir, said Joe. It's mighty easy to manage it, you turn a cock and the thing's done. Ah, here we are more at our ease, said the sportsman, as the balloon ascended. The reflection of the sun on those red sands was getting to be insupportable. What splendid trees, cried Joe. They're quite natural, but they are very fine. Why, a dozen of them would make a forest. Those are baobabs, replied Dr. Ferguson. See, there's one with a trunk fully 100 feet in circumference. It was perhaps at the foot of that very tree that Mason, the French traveller, expired in 1845, for we are over the village of Djele-Mhora, to which he pushed on alone. He was seized by the chief of this region, fastened to the foot of a baobab, and the ferocious black then severed all his joints while the war song of his tribe was chanted. He then made a gash in the prisoner's neck, stopped to sharpen his knife, and fairly tore away the poor wretch's head before it had been cut from the body. The unfortunate Frenchman was but 26 years of age. And France has never avenged so hideous a crime, said Kennedy. France did demand satisfaction, and the said of Zanzibar did all in his power to capture the murderer, but in vain. I move that we don't stop here, urged Joe. Let us go up, master, let us go up higher by all means. All the more willingly, Joe, that there is Mount Duthumi right ahead of us. If my calculations be right, we shall have passed it before 7 o'clock in the evening. Shall we not travel at night? Asked the Scotchman. No, as little as possible. With care and vigilance we might do so safely, but it is not enough to sweep across Africa. We want to see it. Up to this time we have nothing to complain of, master. The best cultivated and most fertile country in the world instead of a desert. Believe the geographers after that. Let us wait, Joe, we shall see by and by. About 6:30 in the evening, the Victoria was directly opposite Mount Duthumi. In order to pass, it had to ascend to a height of more than 3,000 feet, and to accomplish that the doctor had only to raise the temperature of his gas 18 degrees. It might have been correctly said that he held his balloon in his hand. Kennedy had only to indicate to him the obstacles to be surmounted, and the Victoria sped through the air, skimming the summits of the range. At 8 o'clock it descended the farther slope, the acclivity of which was much less abrupt. The anchors were thrown out from the car, and one of them, coming in contact with the branches of an enormous nopal, caught on it firmly. Joe at once let himself slide down the rope and secured it. The silk ladder was then lowered to him, and he remounted to the car with agility. The balloon now remained perfectly at rest, sheltered from the eastern winds. The evening meal was got ready, and the aeronauts, excited by their day's journey, made a heavy onslaught upon the provisions. "What distance have we traversed today?" asked Kennedy, disposing of some alarming mouthfuls. The doctor took his bearings, by means of lunar observations, and consulted the excellent map that he had with him for his guidance. It belonged to the Atlas of Der Neuester Entdeckungen in Africa, the latest discoveries in Africa, published at Gotha by his learned friend Dr. Petermann and by that savant sent to him. This atlas was to serve the doctor on his whole journey, for it contained the itinerary of Burton and Speke to the Great Lakes, the Soudan, according to Dr. Barth, the Lower Senegal, according to Guillaume Legion, and the Delta of the Niger by Dr. Blakey. Ferguson had also provided himself with a work which combined in one compilation all the notions already acquired concerning the Nile. It was entitled The Sources of the Nile, being a general survey of the basin of that river and of its head stream, with the history of the Nilotic discovery by Charles Biquet, D.D. He also had the excellent charts published in the Bulletins of the Geographical Society of London, and not a single point of the countries already discovered could, therefore, escape his notice. Upon tracing on his maps, he found that his latitudinal route had been 2 degrees, or 120 miles to the westward. Kennedy remarked that the route tended toward the south, but this direction was satisfactory to the doctor, who desired to reconnoitre the tracks of his predecessors as much as possible. It was agreed that the night should be divided into 3 watches, so that each of the party should take his turn in watching over the safety of the rest. The doctor took the watch commencing at 9 o'clock, Kennedy the one commencing at midnight, and Joe the 3 o'clock morning watch. So Kennedy and Joe, well wrapped in their blankets, stretched themselves at full length under the awning and slept quietly, while Dr. Ferguson kept on the lookout. Chapter 13th. Change of weather. Kennedy has the fever, the doctor's medicine, travels on land, the basin of Imenge, Mount Rubeho, 6,000 feet elevation, a halt in the daytime. The night was calm. However, on Saturday morning, Kennedy, as he awoke, complained of lassitude and feverish chills. The weather was changing. The sky, covered with clouds, seemed to be laying in supplies for a fresh deluge. A gloomy region is that Zungamoro country, where it rains continually, excepting, perhaps, for a couple of weeks in the month of January. A violent shower was not long in drenching our travellers. Below them, the roads intersected by nullahs, a sort of instantaneous torrent, were soon rendered impracticable, entangled as they were, besides, with thorny thickets and gigantic lianas or creeping vines. The sulphuretted hydrogen emanations, which Captain Burton mentions, could be distinctly smelt. According to his statement, and I think he's right, said the doctor, one could readily believe that there is a corpse hidden behind every thicket. An ugly country this, sighed Joe, and it seems to me that Mr. Kennedy is none the better for having passed the night in it. To tell the truth, I have quite a high fever, said the sportsman. There's nothing remarkable about that, my dear Dick, for we are in one of the most unhealthy regions in Africa, but we shall not remain here long, so let's be off. Thanks to a skillful manoeuvre achieved by Joe, the anchor was disengaged, and Joe reascended to the car by means of the ladder. The doctor vigorously dilated the gas, and the Victoria resumed her flight, driven along by a spanking breeze. Only a few scattered huts could be seen through the pestilential mists, but the appearance of the country soon changed, for it often happens in Africa that some of the unhealthiest districts lie close beside others that are perfectly salubrious. Kennedy was visibly suffering, and the fever was mastering his vigorous constitution. It won't do to fall ill, though, he grumbled, and so saying he wrapped himself in a blanket and lay down under the awning. A little patience, Dick, and you'll soon get over this, said the doctor. Get over it, egad, Samuel, if you've any drug in your travelling chest that will set me on my feet again, bring it without delay. I'll swallow it with my eyes shut. Oh, I can do better than that, friend Dick, for I can give you a febrifuge that won't cost anything. And how will you do that? Very easily. I am simply going to take you up above these clouds that are now deluging us, and remove you from this pestilential atmosphere. I ask for only 10 minutes in order to dilate the hydrogen. The 10 minutes had scarcely elapsed ere the travellers were beyond the rainy belt of country. Wait a little now, Dick, and you'll begin to feel the effect of pure air and sunshine. There's a cure for you, said Joe. Why, it's wonderful. No, it's merely natural. Oh, natural, yes, no doubt of that. I bring Dick into good air, as the doctors do, every day in Europe, or as I would send a patient at Martinique to the Pitons, a lofty mountain on that island, to get clear of the yellow fever. Ah, by Jove, this balloon is a paradise, exclaimed Kennedy, feeling much better already. It leads to it anyhow, replied Joe quite gravely. It was a curious spectacle, that mass of clouds piled up at the moment away below them. The vapours rolled over each other and mingled together in confused masses of superb brilliance as they reflected the rays of the sun. The Victoria had attained an altitude of 4,000 feet, and the thermometer indicated a certain diminution of temperature. The land below could no longer be seen. 50 miles away to the westward, Mount Rubeho raised its sparkling crest, marking the limit of the Ugogo country in east longitude 36 degrees 20 minutes. The wind was blowing at the rate of 20 miles an hour, but the aeronauts felt nothing of this increased speed. They observed no jar and had scarcely any sense of motion at all. 3 hours later, the doctor's prediction was fully verified. Kennedy no longer felt a single shiver of the fever, but partook of some breakfast with an excellent appetite. "That beats sulfate of quinine," said the energetic Scot with hearty emphasis and much satisfaction. "Positively," said Joe, "this is where I'll have to retire to when I get old." About 10 o'clock in the morning the atmosphere cleared up, the clouds parted, and the country beneath could again be seen, the Victoria meanwhile rapidly descending. Dr. Ferguson was in search of a current that would carry him more to the northeast, and he found it about 600 feet from the ground. The country was becoming more broken, and even mountainous. The Zungamoro district was fading out of sight in the east with the last coconut trees of that latitude. Ere long, the crests of a mountain range assumed a more decided prominence. A few peaks rose here and there, and it became necessary to keep a sharp lookout for the pointed cones that seemed to spring up every moment. "We're right among the breakers," said Kennedy. "Keep cool, Dick, we shan't touch them," was the doctor's quiet answer. "It's a jolly way to travel anyhow," said Joe with his usual flow of spirits. In fact, the doctor managed his balloon with wondrous dexterity. "Now, if we had been compelled to go afoot over that drenched soil," said he, "we should still be dragging along in a pestilential mire. Since our departure from Zanzibar, half our beasts of burden would have died with fatigue. We should be looking like ghosts ourselves, and despair would be seizing on our hearts. We should be in continual squabbles with our guides and porters, and completely exposed to their unbridled brutality. During the daytime, a damp, penetrating, unendurable humidity. At night, a cold frequently intolerable, and the stings of a kind of fly whose bite pierces the thickest cloth and drives the victim crazy. All this, too, without saying anything about wild beasts and ferocious native tribes." "I move that we don't try it," said Joe in his droll way. "I exaggerate nothing," continued Ferguson, "for, upon reading the narratives of such travellers as have had the hardihood to venture into these regions, your eyes would fill with tears." About 11 o'clock they were passing over the basin of Imenge, and the tribes scattered over the adjacent hills were impotently menacing the Victoria with their weapons. Finally, she sped along as far as the last undulations of the country which precede Rubeho. These form the last and loftiest chain of the mountains of Usagara. The aeronauts took careful and complete note of the orographic conformation of the country. The 3 ramifications mentioned, of which the Duthumi forms the first link, are separated by immense longitudinal plains. These elevated summits consist of rounded cones, between which the soil is bestrewn with erratic blocks of stone and gravelly boulders. The most abrupt declivity of these mountains confronts the Zanzibar coast, but the western slopes are merely inclined plains. The depressions in the soil are covered with a black, rich loam, on which there is a vigorous vegetation. Various watercourses filter through, toward the east, and work their way onward to flow into the Kingani, in the midst of gigantic clumps of sycamore, tamarind, calabash, and palmyra trees. "Attention," said Dr. Ferguson. "We are approaching Rubeho, the name of which signifies, in the language of the country, the passage of the winds, and we would do well to double its jagged pinnacles at a certain height. If my chart be exact, we are going to ascend to an elevation of 5,000 feet. Shall we often have occasion to reach those far upper belts of the atmosphere?" "Very seldom. The height of the African mountains appears to be quite moderate compared with that of the European and Asiatic ranges, but in any case, our good Victoria will find no difficulty in passing over them." In a very little while, the gas expanded under the action of the heat, and the balloon took a very decided ascensional movement. Besides, the dilation of the hydrogen involved no danger, and only 3/4 of the vast capacity of the balloon was filled when the barometer, by a depression of 8 inches, announced an elevation of 6,000 feet. "Shall we go this high very long?" asked Joe. "The atmosphere of the earth has a height of 6,000 fathoms, said the doctor, "and with a very large balloon one might go far. That is what Messrs. Brioschi and Gay-Lussac did, but then the blood burst from their mouths and ears. Respirable air was wanting. Some years ago 2 fearless Frenchmen, Messrs. Barrel and Bixio, also ventured into the very lofty regions, but their balloon burst." "And they fell?" asked Kennedy abruptly. "Certainly they did, but as learned men should always fall, namely without hurting themselves." "Well, gentlemen," said Joe, "you may try their fall over again if you like. But as for me, who am but a dolt, I prefer keeping at the medium height, neither too far up nor too low down. It won't do to be too ambitious. At the height of 6,000 feet, the density of the atmosphere has already greatly diminished. Sound is conveyed with difficulty, and the voice is not so easily heard. The view of objects becomes confused. The gaze no longer takes in any but large, quite ill-distinguishable masses. Men and animals on the surface become absolutely invisible. The roads and rivers get to look like threads, and the lakes dwindle to ponds. The doctor and his friends felt themselves in a very anomalous condition. An atmospheric current of extreme velocity was bearing them away beyond arid mountains, upon whose summits vast fields of snow surprised the gaze, while their convulsed appearance told of titanic travail in the earliest epoch of the world's existence. The sun shone at the zenith, and his rays fell perpendicularly upon those lonely summits. The doctor took an accurate design of these mountains, which form 4 distinct ridges almost in a straight line, the northernmost being the longest. The Victoria soon descended the slope opposite to the Rubeho, skirting an acclivity covered with woods, and dotted with trees of very deep green foliage. Then came crests and ravines, in a sort of desert which preceded the Ugogo country, and lower down were yellow plains, parched and fissured by the intense heat, and here and there bestrewn with saline plants and brambly thickets. Some underbrush which farther on became forests embellished the horizon. The doctor went nearer to the ground, the anchors were thrown out, and one of them soon caught in the boughs of a huge sycamore. Joe, slipping nimbly down the tree, carefully attached the anchor, and the doctor left his cylinder at work to a certain degree in order to retain sufficient ascensional force in the balloon to keep it in the air. Meanwhile the wind had suddenly died away. "Now," said Ferguson, "take 2 guns, friend Dick, one for yourself and one for Joe, and both of you try to bring back some nice cuts of antelope meat. They will make us a good dinner." "Off to the hunt," exclaimed Kennedy joyously. He climbed briskly out of the car and descended. Joe had swung himself down from branch to branch and was waiting for him below, stretching his limbs in the meantime. "Don't fly away without us, doctor," shouted Joe. "Never fear, my boy, I am securely lashed. I'll spend the time getting my notes into shape. A good hunt to you, but be careful. Besides, from my post here I can observe the face of the country, and at the least suspicious thing I notice I'll fire a signal shot, and with that you must rally home." "Agreed," said Kennedy, and off they went. Chapter 14th. The forest of gum trees, the blue antelope, the rallying signal, an unexpected attack, the Kaniim, a night in the open air, the Mabanguru, Jihaule Mkoa, a supply of water, arrival at Kaize. The country, dry and parched as it was, consisting of a clayey soil that cracked open with the heat, seemed indeed a desert. Here and there were a few traces of caravans, the bones of men and animals that had been half gnawed away, mouldering together in the same dust. After half an hour's walking, Dick and Joe plunged into a forest of gum trees, their eyes alert on all sides and their fingers on the trigger. There was no foreseeing what they might encounter. Without being a rifleman, Joe could handle firearms with no trifling dexterity. "A walk does one good, Mr. Kennedy, but this isn't the easiest ground in the world," he said, kicking aside some fragments of quartz with which the soil was bestrewn. Kennedy motioned to his companion to be silent and to halt. The present case compelled them to dispense with hunting dogs, and no matter what Joe's agility might be, he could not be expected to have the scent of a setter or a greyhound. A herd of a dozen antelopes were quenching their thirst in the bed of a torrent where some pools of water had lodged. The graceful creatures, snuffing danger in the breeze, seemed to be disturbed and uneasy. Their beautiful heads could be seen between every draught, raised in the air with quick and sudden motion as they sniffed the wind in the direction of our 2 hunters, with their flexible nostrils. Kennedy stole around behind some clumps of shrubbery, while Joe remained motionless where he was. The former, at length, got within gunshot and fired. The herd disappeared in the twinkling of an eye. One male antelope only, that was hit just behind the shoulder joint, fell headlong to the ground, and Kennedy leaped toward his booty. It was a blowbuck, a superb animal of a pale bluish color shading upon the gray, but with the belly and the inside of the legs as white as the driven snow. "A splendid shot," exclaimed the hunter. "It's a very rare species of the antelope, and I hope to be able to prepare his skin in such a way as to keep it." "Indeed," said Joe. "Do you think of doing that, Mr. Kennedy?" Why, certainly I do, just see what a fine hide it is. But Dr. Ferguson will never allow us to take such an extra weight. You're right, Joe, still it is a pity to have to leave such a noble animal. The whole of it? Oh, we won't do that, sir. We'll take all the good eatable parts of it, and, if you'll let me, I'll cut him up just as well as the chairman of the Honourable Corporation of Butchers of the City of London could do. As you please, my boy, but you know that in my hunter's way I can just as easily skin and cut up a piece of game as kill it. I'm sure of that, Mr. Kennedy. Well then, you can build a fireplace with a few stones, there's plenty of dry dead wood, and I can make the hot coals tell in a few minutes. Oh, that won't take long, said Kennedy, going to work on the fireplace, where he had a brisk flame crackling and sparkling in a minute or two. Joe had cut some of the nicest steaks, and the best parts of the tenderloin from the carcass of the antelope, and these were quickly transformed to the most savoury of broils. There, those will tickle the doctor, said Kennedy. Do you know what I was thinking about, said Joe. Why, about the steaks you're broiling, to be sure, replied Dick. Not the least in the world. I was thinking what a figure we'd cut if we couldn't find the balloon again. By George, what an idea. Why, do you think the doctor would desert us? No, but suppose his anchor were to slip. Impossible, and besides, the doctor would find no difficulty in coming down again with his balloon. He handles it at his ease. But suppose the wind were to sweep it off, so that he couldn't come back toward us. Come, Joe, a truce to your suppositions, they're anything but pleasant. Ah, sir, everything that happens in this world is natural, of course, but then anything may happen, and we ought to look out beforehand. At this moment the report of a gun rang out upon the air. What's that? Exclaimed Joe. It's my rifle, I know the ring of her, said Kennedy. A signal. Yes, danger for us. For him too, perhaps.